All right, I am back once again, and I was going to do something a little different, sort of a medium format camera comparison. I know a lot of times I talk about not buying cameras and things of that nature, and I actually didn't buy either of these right here. I traded the cameras seen in one of the previous videos for them, and I've been kind of trying them out. This one right here is one that's pretty much all mine now, and I'm kind of borrowing this one from somebody I know. And I was just going to give a brief overview on these two kind of obscure medium format cameras and show a handful of sample photos I've taken with them. The first of them is this Rapid Omega 200. And it's got the original lens cap. It's got a little fold-out lens hood that doesn't really stay out, so it's kind of useless. And this is a kind of odd camera. If you're familiar with press cameras, it obviously looks like one, and it weighs about as much as one. It's got a lot of shoes up here to mount, you know, whatever you want, a light meter, because there's no built-in light meter, one or possibly two flashes. It's got a big grip on the side that is okay. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. It's actually interchangeable lens. You can take the lens off by sort of unlocking this, if I remember correctly. Well, it doesn't really want to come off, so I'm not going to mess with it right now, but you can take off the lens, and there are a few other lens options. It is very, I guess, fiddly might be the right term, because I noticed once before, I think I hit this lever, and it basically just fell off. I almost damaged the lens. I was kind of surprised. And also the back can fall off in a similar manner, which is unusual. I've never seen a camera where the film back can fall off that easily. So it is a camera that you kind of have to be careful with. And to highlight that, I think this is the only camera in my life where I ever had to consult the manual to figure out exactly how to load the film. Fortunately, that was lent along with the camera, but it has a very unusual set of markings on the back. You'll see there's a little number right there. This is the frame you're on, and it is a 6x7 camera, so you get 10 shots in a roll of 120. But you have this plunger that sounds like a, I don't know, almost like a gun being cocked or something. And that is what advances the film and, of course, puts the shutter in place. Or cocks the shutter, I suppose. And whenever you do that, it should move forward, and you can kind of see it's a little off right now, but it's kind of doing it. But when you get to the end, you'll notice that it has a very unusual... There we go. It sort of locks up at 10, but if you want to keep going, you have to push this, and then pull out the plunger again, and you see suddenly it has a series of dots. There's 3 red dots, then 2, then 1, and then at that point you can take out the original roll of film and load a new one, and you kind of start over again. You insert a roll of film and kind of, you know, feed it through, and you get those green dots, and you have to kind of cycle through the 3 green dots, and you have to make sure it's all kind of where it needs to be ahead of time. It doesn't automatically default to 0, or it doesn't automatically default to the load mode, which is kind of annoying, for lack of a better term. I've encountered other cameras that do this before, but on this one with all these different, like there's the series of 3 green dots at the beginning and the series of 3 red dots at the end. It's just a lot of extra minutia to deal with. And again, if you're not careful, it's pretty easy to just knock the back off. I think if you just pull this right here. All right, I can't remember now. I obviously need to play with this camera more. I did take it out and shoot with it for a day or two, and I got a couple of rolls of film, and I thought they were okay. Nothing amazing, but not bad. It's got a maximum shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, aperture range from 3.5, which is pretty fast, especially for a 90mm medium format lens, all the way up to f32, which is pretty closed down. You don't see that too often on like a 35mm camera, unless it's like a telephoto lens. So it does give you some pretty decent aperture options. I don't know what they are for the other lenses. I know there's a couple other lenses out there. There's one that's wider, and I think 2 that are longer. It's got a pretty nice viewfinder, pretty standard rangefinder mechanism. It's got frame lines projected in it. There's 90 and I think something like a 135 roughly inside of it. And they work well enough. I wouldn't say it's perfect. They are just kind of a series of lines, like you get 2 lines at the top and 2 lines at the side. So it's not super accurate as compared to maybe some more modern rangefinders, but it does have parallax correction, and that seems to be pretty accurate. My one big qualm with this camera is that it's very heavy. I would say it probably weighs somewhere around like 6.5 pounds. It's very heavy. And you might look at it and say, well, it's not really that big if you see it in my hands. And yeah, it's not much bigger than like a Mamiya 7 or maybe a Pentax 6.7, but it weighs about as much as a Pentax 6.7. It is, of course, a rangefinder instead of being an SLR. You know, make of that what you will. But it does have a lot of things in common in my mind with the Pentax 6.7. That's a camera I've never owned, but I know a lot of people who have owned them, and I've handled a couple, and I think I shot with one at some point a while back. And it reminds me a lot of this camera. You do have a few features something like the Pentax 6.7 doesn't have. Like the backs are removable. Of course, you'd have to buy a second back for that to really be of any, you know, meaning to you. You've got the lenses. There's not a huge selection from what I've seen, but there are a few others out there. It has a dark slide here. You actually have to remove that, kind of goes alongside the removable back. But it is odd because this is one of the only rangefinder cameras I've ever seen that has a dark slide. So there's a lot of weird things in here where it has certain features that are pretty common to the medium format world, but then there's a lot of things like you don't generally see medium format rangefinders that much. And I know back in the old days they were fairly common, but I'm not too familiar with them, and I don't feel like many people use them or like you see them that much. So it's kind of intriguing to me that it has kind of a weird set of features where it's almost like an old press camera from like the 40s or maybe even kind of the 30s, and you know, obviously some features that go much later, but it also has some of the stranger kind of like the rangefinder and the interchangeable lens, which seem like they're more features that wouldn't have really been widespread until well after World War II, probably well into the 1950s. So that is kind of, I don't know, it's an interesting beast, and I don't think I would buy this camera. I got to play with it for a while, and that was enough for me. But it is something that is a bit out of the ordinary. Not for everybody. But if you are looking for an affordable medium format camera in a 6x7 format, because it's not super common, this is probably one of your more affordable options out there. From what I've seen online, they only go for a couple $100, usually with the same 90mm lens. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it is something to consider if you're looking for sort of a medium format budget option. But at the same time, if you have a little extra money, I think you're probably better off spending a little bit more money and getting something a little better. And I know a lot of people say, well, even going to a Pentax 6.7, that's a pretty big leap in cost, and it's kind of true, but you know, there's not a lot of features on this camera once you get past it. There's no light meter. It does have the rangefinder, which is pretty nice. I think it has some sort of a PC port for a flash connection. Oh yeah, right here. But I don't know many people who use like a PC port. I actually think it has, I don't think that is, yeah, I guess that is a PC port. But I don't know many people who use that. So it's an interesting beast, like I said. I wouldn't take it, but I could see why other people might. And I just thought it was kind of worth noting. And the other one I'm going to compare it to is one that's possibly a little bit more common. It is a Fuji. It's actually a Super Fujica 6, which I'll probably say is Fujica Super 6, because that just kind of slides off the tongue more. But this is kind of an older automat style camera. Folds up very small. It's pretty lightweight. It weighs, you know, maybe probably close to a pound or so, but it's not that much. You get the fold-out lens. As with a lot of medium format cameras, it's a 75mm f3.5. A lot of Rolleiflexes had a similar lens. This, of course, is a Japanese style automat, and there were other companies like Mamiya that made a very similar camera. I think there were a couple others. A few companies made a very similar camera to this. And a lot of them actually had a very similar Fuji lens on it. Fuji made a lot of lenses and would sell them. I think some of the original Mamiyas and sort of the Mamiya 6s and like the 3 and maybe 4 series had Fuji lenses that were, if not this exact lens, very similar. It's got some decent shutter speeds. It goes up to 500, which is maybe not very impressive by modern standards, but for these automat style cameras, especially the cheaper Japanese ones, a lot of them that were kind of pre-war did seem to max out at like 100 or 125. Those are pretty rare. And even some that were made after the war maxed out around 300. 500, of course, with a camera like this is as fast as it's going to go. The one thing I would say about this camera, I feel a little strange, kind of short-sighted, was that the viewfinder is pushed to the far right of the camera. I'm right-eye dominant, so I prefer it being on the left of the camera where it normally is, so I can kind of hold it up and look through it, and I can hold it in my right hand and everything just lines up nicely. I hear a lot of people complain, I guess it's more common to be left-eye dominant, that they wish there were more left-eye cameras. And I mean, here's one right here that nobody ever seems to talk about. I found this a bit annoying because I put my right eye over this and my nose was kind of poking into the back, which was not the end of the world, but it was strange because I don't know why they chose to do this. Maybe they had some statistic that said people preferred to shoot left eye dominant or something like that. I don't know if they would have really had that in Japan in the 1950s, but it's not inconceivable. But that is one thing I don't like about it. I think, with that being said, I think a lot of people would like this feature because I believe most people are left-eye dominant. I don't have a good statistic, but I heard that somewhere, and I don't know. It seems like it could be true. To actually use the camera, you cock the shutter, and you push the button, and it fires. Now, to advance the film is a bit more weird. You would think you just turn this knob, and ultimately you do, but you have this little safety tab, and you have to push that forward and advance the knob a little bit, and then it starts going. And you have a little counter on the back that shows you the number. It's a pretty simple setup, but with the extra steps, if you're not used to it, I could see how maybe it would be confusing or kind of confound people. It is possible to get double exposures on this camera. I know some people who claim to be all about that, and then I never really see them do it. I don't really like double exposure features. I think it's kind of annoying. It just kind of messes up a shot every once in a while. But if you do like double exposures, this might be a good camera for you because it is pretty easy to do a double exposure. You can obviously fire, change your point of view or whatever, fire again, and then once you think you've got what you want, you just advance to the next frame. I like this camera a lot more. I've had this in my possession on and off for several months. I already took it out and shot with it a couple of times on a couple of different film stocks, and I was very impressed with how it looked on some Fuji Gold, not Fuji Gold, Kodak Gold 200, and I really like the images. I don't know if it's quite on par with like the Mamiya 7, but it's not bad. It's not terribly far off, and it's I would say it's easily on par image quality wise with quite a few of the other medium format cameras I've used in the past. I can't really think of too many off the top of my head. I could say a Holga, but that's obviously not a very good representation. But yeah, I like this camera very much. It's very compact. You could pretty easily fit this in a camera bag without taking up too much space. It's pretty hard. You could put it in a backpack or something. It doesn't have any built-in lugs, but most of them were sold with like an ever-ready case. I don't have that. The guy who gave it to me said he had it and he would get it to me at some point, and he also said he had a lens hood or something. I've yet to receive them, but I haven't really followed up too much. But all in all, I like this camera. I think it's I think it's just a solid camera, especially if you want something medium format. I think these Japanese automats are often very overlooked. The Mamiya 6 I mentioned earlier, that's another one that's probably a little bit more common. There are a lot of versions of the Mamiya 6, and a lot of them have different lenses. They're pretty much all 75mm f3.5 lenses, but they're made by some of them are made by Fuji. I think some of them were Nikon. I know that Mamiya did make some of them, but they used different lens styles and brandings, and there were even a couple of other more obscure companies that made lenses for them. I can't think of all of them, but I know there were several companies that made lenses for them. And there were a few different body designs where, of course, the shutter speeds changed over time. They got faster, obviously. And some of them had sort of a little waist level viewfinders. There's a little window you could look through and have kind of an approximate waist level view. That only seemed to exist on some of the earlier models. They got rid of it, but they're very good cameras, and I feel like they're kind of underappreciated. And I'm kind of surprised they're not more common because, or more commonly used, because they do seem to be common. They're easy to find, and they're generally not that expensive. Like this camera here usually sells for less than $200 from what I've seen, and most of the Mamiyas will sell, the more common ones with, I think there's an Olympus Zuiko lens. Those will often sell for about $200. Some of the later models that have the faster shutter speeds, and I think a lot of them have the Fuji and Nikon lenses, will sell for closer to $600. But all in all, I still don't think that's a terrible price for a medium format camera that seems to be very reliable and is, very compact. Just all in all, a pretty decent camera. That's pretty much all I've got to say on these two. It just kind of an interesting example of how you can have two cameras that, you know, on paper can be kind of similar, but in actual usage and on further examination, you can see that they're very different. Obviously, I like this camera a lot. I already traded the guy for it. I'm going to keep it. This one I borrowed. It was okay. It was intriguing, I guess would be the best word to use. And I used it for a day, and it was, you know, I could suffer it, I suppose, but I don't think I'd want to use this as my main camera. It's just too heavy. The film is hard to load. It's actually a little bit more labor intensive to unload than a lot of other cameras I've used, which I found kind of strange. Getting the back off is a little bit of a trip. Obviously, like I said, you can take the lens off and the back off, but it's just, I'd have to fiddle with them for a few minutes to figure it out, and I just don't want to. All in all, I thought this was kind of an interesting comparison. That's all I can really say. I might go out and maybe compare this one to the Mamiya 7 later. Everybody will say this one's the better comparison because it's interchangeable lens and 6x7, but I think it would be kind of fun to compare them and just see if there's any real merit in the image quality versus the price, something to that effect. But yeah, let me know what you think, and tune in next time.